everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Apocalypse Report. My name is Robert King. During Jesus' final days on earth, he told his disciples that Jerusalem and the temple were going to be utterly destroyed, thrown down without a stone left upon a stone, is the way he worded it. Well, later his disciples were somewhat stunned, but they asked him, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your presence and the conclusion of a system of things? Of course, they had in mind the conclusion of the Jewish system of things, which of course ended in the year 70 when the Roman armies came, as Jesus said, and obliterated Jerusalem and tore down Herod's temple. But Jesus also spoke of the end or the conclusion of an entire system, the global civilization that has existed since, well, going back to Egypt and Assyria and those original empires. So that's what we're interested in, isn't it? The Watchtower Society, of course, has convinced Jehovah's Witnesses that the conclusion of the system of things began in 1914. But what really is the evidence of that? Well, Jehovah's Witnesses will talk about chronology, the 7 times, and from 607 to 1914. I did a video on the Gentile times, by the way, so I won't discuss that here. But Jesus foretold that nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There'll be food shortages, pestilences, and earthquakes in one place after the other. And of course, before 1914, Charles Taze Russell, using Bible chronology along with some pyramidology, which of course has long since been discarded, began pointing forward to 1914. And sure enough, what happened? June 28th, 1914, Archduke Ferdinand and his wife Sophie were assassinated upon an official royal visit to the city of Sarajevo. And because of all the intertwined alliances and treaties, one nation, one bloc after the other declared war upon the other. And by August, all of Europe was set to go to war. And then on October the 2nd, Charles Taze Russell announced to the Bethel group at breakfast, the Gentile times are over. Their kings have had their day. And ever since then, the Watchtower has pointed to 1914 as the date for Christ's return. He came in that year, and then in 1918, he judged the house of God, and he appointed a faithful slave over all of his belongings, dismissed an evil slave, and cleansed his organization of all uncleanness and impurity, set them free from Babylon the Great. But there are 2 features about the conclusion of a system of things that we need to consider. One is the conclusion of a system of things is actually the conclusion of the political system of civilization as we know it. Well, how do we arrive at that conclusion? Well, in the Hebrew scriptures, and Daniel in particular, it shows that there will be certain developments among the nations during the time of the end. And that expression, time of the end, is the equivalent of the Greek expression, the conclusion of a system of things. The reason we know that is because in the Septuagint, which was the first translation of the Hebrew into Greek, in Daniel, in several places, it used the word centelia, which is the word that Jesus used when he spoke of the conclusion of a system of things. So the time of the end and the conclusion are the same thing. But according to Daniel, particularly the 11th chapter, for instance, during the time of the end, there's this war between the king of the north, the king of the south. The king of the north is victorious. He subjugates the king of the south. something that Jehovah's Witnesses have not come to fully appreciate. The Watchtower says over and over again that both the king of the north and the south go all the way to their end and are destroyed. read the prophecy. It's a singular king, goes all the way to his end, the king of the north. He subjugates the king of the south, also known as Egypt, because it was the original king of the south. So there are some things that Jehovah's Witnesses really do not appreciate, and the Watchtower really, I mean, they've gotten out of the prophecy business more or less. I mean, since the Soviet Union collapsed, and I've mentioned this over and over again, they really have no understanding of who the king of the north is. But obviously there is a king of the north active today. It's generally recognized by historians that European civilization is basically extended from the Greek civilization through the Roman Empire, and that's really in accord with Bible prophecy. And it's especially important because, of course, after Christ established Christianity, we know that it was subjugated by the Roman Empire. Constantine more or less hijacked Christianity, and it has been subject to the popes and the King of England, for example. He's the head of the Church of England. At any rate, this entire European system is at its end. It used to be expressed through the colonial empire until after World War II. But now it is expressed through the London-centered monetary and financial system. It's still this war, though, between the Republic and the Empire. That's where, going back to Greece, there was the empire, but there was supposedly it was the cradle of democracy as well. And the Romans flirted with republicanism. But now at this late stage, we see that the empire, expressed through this financial system, they're on the ropes, they're bankrupt, they're printing money out of thin air, but enslaving the nations with this fictitious debt. What's the scripture say? The lender becomes a slave. The borrower becomes a slave of the lender. And so the nations are becoming enslaved. They have the power to bankrupt the bankers, but they're not using it. Look what's happening to Greece. A few weeks ago, their Prime Minister, Papandreou, the bankers were putting pressure on him, more austerity, more sell off the Parthenon, we'll take it. Well, give us your railroads, It's like they've been really conquered by an outside force. So Papandreou said, well, we'll let the people decide. That's democracy. Before the week was over, he was out. And the bankers installed one of their Goldman Sachs guys. He's now the head of, they did the same thing in Italy. And the people are trying to fight back, but I can tell you who's going to win. The king of the north, also expressed in the 8th chapter of Daniel, that also mentions during the time of the end, a king fierce in countenance will stand up and bring to ruin the mighty ones of the world. The democratic leaders, perhaps, even many, many wealthy people who have invested in this debt, this fictitious debt. But we've reached the point now where they're wrangling over Greece's debt, because if they default, then it sets off a chain reaction. It's not just the bankers that are owed the money, but there are these invisible transactions called derivatives and credit default swaps. When the financial crisis hit full force in 2008, that was what caused it. AIG had all of it's basically, these derivatives some of them are like insurance contracts. So pension funds or whoever that buy somebody's debt, they buy bonds to insure themselves. If this bondholder does not pay, they buy an insurance policy. It's called a derivative. And the five big banks in the United States have written hundreds of trillions of dollars of these so-called insurance policies. Well, now they're up against the wall because as these nations start defaulting, and they have to because there's no way, austerity, I mean, that's just, killing the goose that laid the golden egg. So as Greece defaults, as Italy defaults, as Spain will default, and Portugal, it will trigger these insurance policies. But now the bankers who've written these policies are colluding to say, well, no, this is not an official default. We're not going to pay these insurance policies. But either way, I mean, imagine if many of you are no doubt homeowners and car owners, and you have insurance on your home and your car, and you expect your insurance company to be there if you ever have a claim. But what would you do if they officially, publicly said, well, you keep paying us your premiums, but we're not going to pay any sort of claim you might have? So the whole system is based on trust. Where's the trust? So at any rate, I'm trying to illustrate the point that this financial system has reached an end, a conclusion. And that's one aspect of the conclusion. And that's why now London and their Anglo-American partner are pushing for war. Because one part of the world is not really in such a bad condition. The Chinese economy, as you no doubt know, is really booming, and they're developing a nation. They're doing what the United States did 100 years ago, 50 years ago. The Chinese are putting a man on the moon. They're talking about going to Mars. They're building atomic reactors. They're turning the deserts into productive land. But political and economic power has been centered in Europe for 2,000 years. And do you think these men that will fight and kill and spread war and famine to keep control, do you think they're going to allow the Chinese or the people in India or Russia to become dominant? It's not going to happen. So they're going to war. They're going to sink the whole nation-state system. What do they care if millions or billions of people die, as long as they stay on top? And that's really Satan's mentality. And that's because he has infused it into them. Remember, when Satan is thrown down, he goes off in great anger, knowing he has a short period of time. And Revelation, the 12th chapter, says, woe for the earth and the sea, because the devil has come down to you. The Watchtower says that happened in 1914. Well, as a result of Satan being thrown down, he's thrown down and he persecutes Jehovah's people for 3.5 years, it says. But in the 13th chapter of Revelation, there's a wild beast with 7 heads. And one of its heads receives a mortal sword stroke and is dead, but miraculously revives. And it does so for 3.5 years, 42 months. It goes off to wage war against God's people. So put the pieces of the prophetic puzzle together. When Satan is thrown down, his ruling earthly political system has a death stroke. The Anglo-American system will, and it's on the edge right now. People can see it. Both nations are bankrupt. Both of them are flailing. They want to get this war going while they still can finance a war. Oh, the Watchtower says this took place in 1914. That's when Satan was thrown down. The beast received its mortal head wound. But I think most historians would acknowledge the fact that Great Britain and America won the First World War. How can we say they received a mortal head wound? Doesn't make any sense. Sure, there were an appalling number of deaths, especially the Englishmen, because they fought in the war much longer than the Americans. The Americans only fought in World War I for a little over a year. They didn't enter the war until the sinking of the Lusitania, because a lot of Americans had ancestral ties to Germany. They weren't, real big until the sinking of the Lusitania. That was the master stroke. And many say, of course, the British were behind that. to get the Americans involved. And when the Americans got involved, the war was quickly over. The Americans lost about 116,000 men in that war. That's a lot of men. Not nearly as many that were killed in the Second World War, over 400,000. But you know, the American Civil War in 1861 to 1865, 500,000 Americans died. Well, that's because they were all Americans on both sides. But neither the government of Britain or the United States was toppled or became unstable. There was no civil unrest in those nations. Even Germany, they survived the war. So how can we say that the beast died and came back to life? Another very unreasonable aspect of the Watchtower's teaching, which Jehovah's Witnesses accept without questioning, but I'm imploring you to think. Now, when this wild beast comes back to life, it says that it gives command for an image to be made of the wild beast, and it commands all the earth to worship that image upon pain of death. But everyone who worships the image gets stamped with 666 from God, right? In other words, it's symbolic that they are unworthy of life. And isn't that what the Revelation says? That everyone who receives this mark, their names are blotted out of the book of life. Well, the Watchtower says the image of this beast was the League of Nations. But when it became defunct, that was a fulfillment of Revelation, the 17th chapter, when this beast went into the abyss, and then it emerged as the United Nations. But if that is true, that means the judgment of mankind is based upon how people viewed this League of Nations, or now the United Nations. And if they support it in any way, then they're condemned to everlasting death. That's actually what the Watchtower teaches in the Revelation Grand Climax book. It says that Judgment Day began in 1919, and then again in 1945, when this United Nations beast emerged from the abyss. If that is true, then what is the point of Jehovah's Witnesses doing a worldwide preaching work? It's not possible for anyone who has this 666 to repent and have their name penciled back in the book of life. It's not possible. The 666 means that a person is going to die forever, permanent death, because they will have rejected God's kingdom in favor of Satan's imitation kingdom. That's the judgment. But yet, Jehovah's Witnesses preach to all kinds of people, and many people accept the message and become Jehovah's Witnesses. So how could this judgment of the 666 have come about? Anyway, I've done a video on that. I won't spend any more time on it, but that is one aspect of what occurs during the conclusion of the system of things. The other aspect is what Jesus spoke about in the 13th chapter of Matthew. And that's where he gave this illustration of the wheat and the weeds. The wheat are the sons of the kingdom, the chosen ones. The weeds are the sons of the devil, their imitation. And they grow together until the harvest. And Jesus said, the harvest is a conclusion of a system of things. So while this king of the north and south are fighting it out and the empire establishes itself and starts wrecking the world, the harvest takes place. And what is the harvest? Again, in the 13th chapter of Matthew, Jesus said he will send forth his angels, and they will collect out from his kingdom all persons doing lawlessness and all things causing stumbling. And they'll take the weeds and bind them up and throw them into the fiery furnace. In other words, they're destroyed. Well, the Watchtower says this took place back in 1918. And the wheat were harvested out of Christendom. But Christendom's still around, still thriving, and people are still leaving Christendom, becoming Jehovah's Witnesses. Is a harvest an ongoing thing? No, not according to Jesus. It happens suddenly. And I'll speak more on that in a minute. But there is a way we can use our minds to reason to determine if this has happened. We simply have to ask and honestly answer the question: have the angels removed all lawless persons from Christ's kingdom? And remember, the kingdom, in this sense, is Christ's congregation. Remember in Colossians, Paul told them, he said, you have been transferred into the kingdom of the Son of his love. So anointed Christians are in this kingdom, or the congregation. But with them are Satan's agents, fake anointed ones, or unfaithful anointed ones. It's not Christendom. They're in Christ's kingdom all the way up until the harvest. Just as in the Corinthian congregation, Paul spoke of the superfine apostles that apparently were highly regarded in the Corinthian congregation. And Paul said, these men are false apostles, deceitful workers. And he says, no wonder. They transform themselves into ministers of righteousness. The devil does the same thing. He transforms himself into an angel of light. The wheat and the weeds. They're indistinguishable by men. But Jehovah knows those who belong to him. And during the harvest, he has the angels rip out those who are not the true sons of God. Well, there are many other prophecies that tie into this. For example, the Bible explains, it doesn't use the word spiritual paradise, but it paints a picture. And of course, the Watchtower says that Jehovah's Witnesses are now in spiritual paradise. And they reason that because Jehovah's Witnesses all believe the same thing, they have organizational unity, conformity would be a better word, and there is a brotherhood. There's no denying that. But that's not what spiritual paradise is. Not according to the prophecies. According to Isaiah, for example, spiritual paradise, as we call it, is typified by the absence of evil persons. Remember, he said, on the highway of holiness, there will not be one foolish person. And God will make the lion lie down with the lamb. So that he said, there will be no harm in all my holy mountain. No predators of any kind to menace us. And isn't that what Jesus said would occur during the harvest? All those doing lawlessness will be removed, leaving only peaceful, innocent, harmless people. But now look at the organization of Jehovah's Witnesses, spiritual paradise. There have been tens of thousands, apparently, children who have been raped, sodomized, sexually abused, all manner of horrible, vile things have been committed by men who call themselves Jehovah's Witnesses. Some have been elders, some have been ministerial servants, and one was a governing body member who abused young men at Bethel, and he was quietly shipped off. Well, the Watchtower claims that they maintain their spiritual paradise through disfellowshipping these guys. But that's not the way it works. The real spiritual paradise will be when the angels intervene and physically debar wicked men. How could it be a spiritual paradise when you have innocent souls being preyed upon by sexual predators? So anyway, there's a lot more to it, isn't there? The point is, the harvest has not taken place yet, which means the conclusion has not begun yet. But we're at that point, and we can determine that by the fact that this system, political and economic system, Europe and America, has reached an end. at this moment now. I mean, I post relevant news items on the Watchman's Post at ewatchman.com pretty much on a daily basis, and provide a video of the day to try to provide some insight into what's really happening in the world. Because I mean, obviously the mainstream media is tied in with this financier oligarchy that wants to deceive and blind us. But at any rate, we're leading up to World War III. And that's a fact. And I know most people go about their everyday lives, you see them talking on their cell phones and doing their iPod, their BlackBerry or whatever, and trying to make a living, raise a family, going to school, and all these things. Meanwhile, the military men are preparing. You can't do a world war just overnight. It takes years and years of strategizing and preparation. But all indications are now they're in the final stages of preparation for world war. And China and Russia know what the game is. They know that they're the ultimate targets of the Anglo-American beast. And they've pretty much drawn a line in the sand. If you attack Iran, it's going to be world war. And of course, it will involve the use of nuclear weapons. Just recently, this embargo they placed on Iran, that the EU cannot import Iranian oil. Well, most of their oil goes to China and India anyway. And they're shutting down Iranian banks, making it very difficult for them to finance importation of food into Iran or sell their oil. But India has agreed with Iran to exchange Iranian oil for Indian gold, and not even to use the dollar, or the petrodollar as it is called. And this is a huge, huge deal. It is basically a declaration of war. They've already declared war, basically. I mean, the United States has assassinated an Iranian nuclear scientist a couple of weeks ago. And Iran accused the United States, and a spokesman for the United States said, well, we didn't do it, but, we know who did. And it's quite likely they were referring to Israel. But anyway, there are a lot of troop movements reported now, and tanks on rail cars, which this is always a prelude to war. These massive military movements. They just released another carrier group to the Persian Gulf. That makes 3 carrier battle groups, strike forces. So they're ringing Iran. They sold the Saudis some billions of dollars of jet aircraft. United Arab Emirates are getting a bunch of weaponry. Everybody is building weapons systems. China, Russia, they know what's coming. And you should know what's coming. The Watchtower says that all the signs of Christ took place in 1914. They cannot be duplicated. But that's not true. It is simply not true. We're on the edge of World War III. Financial collapse, that will trigger food shortages in one place after the other. There could be a natural pestilence, or it could be man-made. Some scientists in Holland just created a type of avian virus that is communicable between humans. It could be the most deadly virus. They've asked them to hold off on it for a while. Saner heads prevail, but surely the masters of this world, the British Empire, has a long-standing policy going back to Thomas Malthus in the mid-19th century. The world is overpopulated, and now that the financial system is imploding, they want to reduce the world's population by a sizable percentage. They want 80%. And they're intent on bringing that about. And Jehovah, though, is going to allow them a quarter, according to Revelation. When the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse are released, they're given authority to kill 1/4 of the earth by means of war, the sword, pestilence, and famine. Back during World War I, and even including the Spanish influenza, I think it was 2 or 3%. So was the Bible exaggerating? I don't think so. I think the Watchtower has got it completely wrong. It's, as I've said many times, an operation of air. But going to Malachi, to show that this harvest will take place suddenly, God says that he's going to send his messenger to clear up a way before him. And suddenly there will come to his temple, to God's temple, the true Lord, whom you people are seeking. Jehovah's Witnesses are seeking Christ, right? And the messenger of the covenant in whom you are delighting. The temple, of course, is Christ's congregation, the kingdom. It's not talking about the Jewish temple. It doesn't exist anymore. You remember Peter wrote that judgment begins with the house of God. And so the judgment will occur during the context of this global war. The angels will be involved, and people will have their faith put to the test. That's what the next verse in Malachi says. But who will be putting up with the day of his coming? And who will be the one standing when he appears? Well, the Watchtower says that, oh no, Jesus appeared invisibly in 1914. But if that's true, that entire generation is gone. So are we off scot-free now? When he appears, who will be the one standing when he appears? He's already appeared, has he? Well, it says he will be as a launderman and as a refiner. In other words, he will get rid of the evil, clear out all things causing stumbling. Look, have all things that cause stumbling been cleared out of the spiritual paradise of Jehovah's Witnesses? I've mentioned this before in a previous video. I'll repeat it here. In the late 60s, the Watchtower started touting 1975 as the year for Armageddon, the end of 6,000 years of human history, and it would be the beginning of the 1,000-year reign. All right. So a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses believed that. 1975 came and went. And the faith of Jehovah's Witnesses, many of them came and went as well. They were stumbled because they put all of their faith in the Watchtower. So how can we believe that the angels have removed all causes for stumbling? Reason upon this. I'm not the apostate. The Apostle Paul said, he said, because I tell you the truth, I'm condemned. No, I'm telling you the truth. Judgment Day is ahead. The conclusion of a system of things is something that's far beyond what we imagine. And we're on the edge. We're on the edge of it right now. Thank you for watching this edition of the Apocalypse Report.